You're worried that people will be discriminated against based on whether or not they've had the vaccine.
Look, that's exactly right. Listen, I think vaccines are terrific. I've had the vaccine myself. I think it's given us a lot of freedom. But I think there's a real potential for government overreach. And I don't believe anyone should be forced to take the vaccine. It should be your personal choice. You should make the choice based on your health, based on the decisions you want. And so I've introduced this week legislation that would, number one, prohibit any federal vaccine passport, prohibit the Biden administration from doing anything to mandate vaccines, but it also prohibits discrimination in employment. We're seeing some places where employers are saying, if you're not vaccinated, you're fired, and that ought to be illegal. Your health decisions are yours to make, and it shouldn't be your boss, it shouldn't be the government, it shouldn't be anyone else forcing you to make those decisions.
Oh, nothing. Just a Republican declaring on national television that your own personal health decision should be your choice, quote, based on your health, based on the decision you want. He even tweeted this very video with the caption, your health decisions are yours to make, it shouldn't be your boss, the government, or anyone else forcing you to make these decisions. In other words, Ted Cruz believes in the choice to do what you want with your own body. He is so close to getting it. But of course, Ted Cruz isn't actually pro-choice because he only believes that choice is necessary on issues that are important to him. And so even though you could literally substitute women's reproductive rights with vaccines, you'd get a different answer because there's no consistency in Ted Cruz's values, only expedience. Consider too, in Ted Cruz's own state of Texas, Republicans signed into law a heartbeat ban abortion bill, SB 8, barring abortions at the onset of a fetal heartbeat, which could occur as early as 6 weeks into pregnancy when most women wouldn't even know they were pregnant. And you're not going to believe this, but Mr. The government shouldn't force you to make a decision against your will didn't have a word to say about this bill. Weird how the government taking away your bodily autonomy is apparently okay on Republican agenda items. But what's worse is that while Republicans are demanding that the government get in between a woman and her doctor on the issue of abortions, no one is actually suggesting that the government is forcing you to get a vaccine. This argument that no one should be forced to take the vaccine is a complete straw man. It's not something that exists. And yet Ted Cruz showing up on Fox News and saying that is implying that people are. Why have an entire segment demanding something not happen that already isn't happening if your goal wasn't to manipulate people into thinking that was a real issue? If I went on national television and said, schools should not be forcing children to eat bugs, you'd probably think that schools were forcing children to eat bugs, otherwise why would I say it? In other words, Ted Cruz is manipulating his own supporters here. But then Ted Cruz does it again. He goes on to congratulate himself for introducing legislation that would prohibit the Biden administration from mandating the use of vaccine passports, despite the fact that the White House has quite literally said that it won't mandate the use of vaccine passports.
Two questions. One on vaccine again. Is there any thought being given to a federally organized vaccine passport of some kind? Does the president see that maybe as some kind of tool that could be used, or would he lean more on the side of people who have raised objections over privacy and so on?
Well, let me be very clear on this. I know there's been lots of questions. The government is not now, nor will we be supporting a system that requires Americans to carry a credential. There will be no federal vaccinations database and no federal mandate requiring everyone to obtain a single vaccination credential. As these tools are being considered by the private and nonprofit sectors, our interest is very simple from the federal government, which is Americans' privacy and rights should be protected, and so that these systems are not used against people unfairly. There is a movement, as you know, in the private sector to identify ways that they can return to events where there are large swaths of people safely in soccer stadiums or theaters, and that's something that that's where the idea originated, and we expect that's where it will be concluded. We will be providing some guidance, which will look like an FAQ, a frequently asked question. I hate acronyms, but that provides important answers to questions that Americans have, in particular around concerns about privacy, security, or discrimination soon. I don't have an exact date for that yet.
So one might think that given the White House's crystal clear position on the issue of vaccine passports, that going on Fox News to brag about your legislation that would ban the White House from enacting vaccine passports is nothing more than empty virtue signaling. He's trying to fix a problem that does not exist by framing it in such a way where people would presume that it does, because everything he does is dripping in bad faith. And then the icing on the cake, Ted Cruz admits that he's gotten the vaccine and yet still still warns about the potential for government overreach. Not that there is government overreach, because if there was, he'd have just cited even a single example, but that something nefarious could happen. And this is the GOP's entire MO. Make up a scary situation that doesn't exist, talk about it as if it does, get their viewers and supporters whipped into a frenzy, and manifest it into an actual issue, despite the fact that it was only cooked up in their own imagination. Remember when Republicans warned that migrant caravans would mean your wives would get raped and your kids would get sold drugs? Remember when gay marriage would destroy the sanctity of marriage? Remember when the ACA would lead to death panels? When allowing trans Americans to use the restrooms that correspond to their gender identities would mean an explosion of sexual assaults? None of those exist. They were created by Republicans to scare you. And then those same Republicans relied on the right-wing feedback loop to run against these very issues that they themselves created. When we talk about the politics of fear, this is exactly what we mean. But what's especially ironic in all of this is that Ted Cruz apparently spends all this time and all this energy getting all worked up over hypothetical situations, and yet when real emergencies, real crises occur, Ted Cruz is nowhere to be found. Just imagine for a moment if Ted Cruz got as upset over something like, say, people freezing and dying in the cold from an Arctic blast, as he did about problems that he's made up in his head. The guy isn't interested in solving any problems, he's interested in creating imaginary scenarios that he can fearmonger about in order to manipulate people into supporting his warped agenda. And by the way, it's especially telling that instead of spending his time on national television simply encouraging the use of vaccines, he uses his time drumming up opposition to them. And it's not like he's personally against vaccines, he said he even got one. But at a time when we've already lost more than 500,000 Americans to COVID, you would think that he would want to use his platform to encourage people to take the simple, free step to survive, instead of spending all of his airtime grandstanding for the base and fear-mongering about something that, again, quite literally doesn't exist. And so look, whether it's his hypocrisy on the vaccine or his hypocrisy on bodily autonomy, Ted Cruz doesn't have a leg to stand on here. The simple fact is that clearly he understands the concept of making decisions based on our own choices and not allowing the government to dictate what we do with our bodies. He's made that abundantly clear, which makes it all the more hypocritical when Cruz then talks out of the other side of his mouth and supports his own party in his own state, putting one of the most onerous restrictions on a woman's autonomy in the entire country. It's a testament to the fact that the Republican Party doesn't actually stand for any consistent principles or values, it's just their own narrow-minded agenda that they're trying to impose on everyone else. The hypocrisy unto itself is bad enough, but it's the shamelessness that they have in espousing it that shows that people like Ted Cruz really are the worst of American politics. To see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe. And for a deeper dive, check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I discuss the week's top stories and interview major players in the world of politics, like Vice President Kamala Harris, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, Elizabeth Warren, Chuck Schumer, Katie Porter, Pete Buttigieg, Nancy Pelosi, and many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.